swan boats and daisy chains. Can't seem to recall my true given name. I see my footprints, how they come, how they go. Was that yesterday or only a moment ago? My heart is gone. I've gone cold. My heart is gone.
Welcome to the social-engineer.org podcast number 13. And yes,
who's here today?
Dave is back.
Dave is back. Inappropriate as it.
Oh, I thought we were Hornsby free.
No, I said I'm only gonna do it like a couple times. I think I'm only do it a
I
couple times.
thought it was banned.
It's not banned. I'm just gonna do it a couple times.
Okay, well that's the second time already. So a couple.
No, it doesn't count because I did the one beforehand. So I got at least 4 I can do.
One more.
All right, one more.
Oh man, I tell you, number 79. The whole crew's here. Dave, Ping, and Michelle. We're all here.
Hey.
Feels so warm and fuzzy inside.
The SE podcast family.
The family's back. Not one big happy family because Chris is in a bad mood today, but other than that, we're all good.
I'm not in a bad mood. It's just
You are in a bad mood.
No, you know what? If you stopped playing that music, we would all be in a great mood.
That's it.
I wanted to play Bruce Hornsby right there, but I'm not burning my last one that I have on this specific comment here. I'm waiting for the perfect moment.
Yeah, what is the count? Like, how many do you get per podcast? Just so that we can establish this.
I think that's is up to the player of the music and how he's feeling that day. Whoever's the steward of Bruce Hornsby's music being played on here should be the person that decides how many times that it's played. I'm saying to this podcast.
Just realize how much this is all about Dave right now. Me.
I tell you.
Honestly, I almost accidentally played it, and I hit mute right before it happened. Thank gosh, because I wasn't trying to hit it there. I was trying to move it to a different screen. Woo, that would have been close.
Very ineffective technique.
So that's the excuse today. I almost played it, but I hit mute in time.
I almost played it. Yeah. That's the daily excuse, Michelle.
I almost. Always a slip of the finger, isn't it?
I tell
It
you.
is.
I think that we should talk about the upcoming schedule of classes.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Thank you, Ping.
I love you, Ping. Well, by the time this podcast comes out, we would have accomplished our very first MLSE class.
Which stands for?
That is the master's level social engineering. Yes.
Awesome.
Developed fully on a napkin over oysters with Michelle in Baltimore.
Yeah, I guess that's how the best ones go.
That's how the best ones go. And we'll give more details after it's over because, either we will be erasing the name MLSE from history or we will be praising it up and down. So we will see what happens in a couple weeks. Let's see. What else is next? After that, that's March. Now, April, we're kind of training free. But that's kind of a lie, but it's just public training free.
That's absolutely not true.
It's not true, but it's public training.
Well, when's your next publicly available training class, which is probably sold out?
Not yet. The next one is an OSINT class that we're doing in Baltimore. That is May 12th and 13th, Baltimore, Maryland. Then our next APSE class in June is about 3/4 full. And after that, we are back at Black Hat. Our 5-day APSE course is July 29th, August 2nd.
July 30th through August 2nd.
30th.
You only get 4 days, baby. 5-day class fit down into 4 days.
You know what happened? In my calendar, I have Black Hat because I'm flying out Friday.
It's okay. I forgive you that after all these years of knowing you and having done Black Hat with you alongside you, where it's always been 4 days, you include your travel.
I know, but Black Hat has allowed us to do 5 days this year. We're the only class. Special announcement.
Really?
No, not at all. It's a total lie.
Yeah, I was like, you better get all these people to change their reservations, their flights scramble that's happening right now for the people that are registered.
Yeah, total lie. No, not at all happening at all. And then there is another OSINT class that is in Dallas, Texas in November 3 and 4. There is one more public training And that's only if Dave lets me back into DerbyCon this year.
Wait, why hasn't Dave told you?
Well,
Call for trainers hasn't even opened yet. Thank you very much.
I mean, that's it. So,
Second, it's not just Dave's decision. There's people other than Dave behind DerbyCon that make the decision. I'm going to vote for Chris that let him in. I mean, but it's pretty tight this year. Pretty tight competition. I don't know.
See, that's what I have to deal with. So if we don't get invited back to Derby, then there won't be another OSINT class. If we do, then there will be one more extra OSINT class the very last week of September.
If it had it my way, I would definitely have you in. So let's put it that way. I can't confirm nor deny because call for trainers haven't even opened yet. But you got my vote, buddy.
See, so that's how it works. He tells me I have his vote. We have no proof of that. If I get rejected, I won't know why anonymous person rejected me.
His cover his ass maneuver.
Yeah.
Dave's like the bad girlfriend. He rejects you but doesn't tell you why.
Yeah, we're better just friends.
It's not you, it's me.
Yeah, it's not you, it's me. We're just better friends, aren't we?
I still want to play Bruce Hornsby right now, but I don't know if this is the right time.
I think of you as a friend, as a brother.
You're in the friend zone, Chris.
You're in the friend zone.
I'm in the Dave friend zone.
Oh no.
Yeah, that's like bad breakup music right there. Yeah, definitely bad breakup music.
All right. That's it. I can't do anymore.
Thank God, because we're about to start
talking.
The
tension's killing me. I had to get it out.
We're about to start talking about our guest, so it's really good that Hornsby is over. I think she's an avid hater of Bruce Hornsby.
Listen, can we just why are we always getting your guests on here that you want, Chris? And people that always hate Bruce Hornsby?
Because this is the social-engineering.org podcast.
It's always what Chris wants.
DerbyCon.
It's always what Chris wants.
It's great. I would be more than happy to get guests that you guys recommend on here. If you recommend some, I'd be more than happy to do it.
Can we have Dave Kennedy? I don't know who that is, but Dave Kennedy is a guest on this show.
Well, I would have Dave, but I saw him on Fox News, and just the way he handled that.
Sweating it up.
Oh, low blow, Chris.
Snap.
Low blow.
Snap.
Dude, I felt so bad for you.
He handled it just fine.
I know. He handled it amazing.
Hornsby
What's
music.
everybody feel bad for me? I feel so bad for how Dave was treated. I'm like, listen, I handle my own. I'm a big boy. I fired back at those guys and gals.
It wasn't that I felt bad because you didn't handle it right. I felt bad because they invite you on, and then they totally blindside you with these two people, including the host. That's like, yeah, you're wrong.
Listen, I completely agree with you. And obviously, I sent an email to the producer basically stating, hey, this isn't acceptable, and please don't invite me back onto your show again. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm fine with handling challenges, but when it's supposed to be like a 3 versus 1 and they only want to hear their opinion, that's not news. That's not something that I attest to. I mean, I understand people can have differences of opinions. That's fine. And I respect, differences of opinions. But when you're there to push a specific, message without even understanding or even knowing the facts, I mean, I was educating them, and they were challenging what was actually facts and already been presented and well established by reliable sources. Like, they didn't even know their own news.
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
Not to get into the whole debate about it, but it was ridiculous, and I won't be going back on there again.
No, all good. Okay, so 2012, I saw a TED speech. I think it was probably one of the top TED speeches I've ever seen. A psychologist named Amy Cuddy had brain damage that lowered her IQ by 30 points. Basically told to give up on all of her goals and hopes, and she did not accept that, and she totally transformed her life. Now she's a social psychologist, wrote a book, gave that speech. I've been begging her to come on the show since I've seen that TED speech, and now that the book is out, sitting in my hand right here, she's coming on the podcast today, if you can believe it. We are back with our guest, Amy Cuddy. Thank you for coming on. Maybe we could start off with just a little bit of background on you.
Of course.
Maybe you could tell our listeners who you are, first of all, what it is that you research.
So I'm a professor at Harvard Business School. I'm a social psychologist. I study how people sort of judge themselves and each other, but I really focus on body language, and specifically, how does our body language shape the way we feel about ourselves? So how are we affecting our own thoughts and feelings by the way we hold ourselves and walk and move and smile or not smile?
How did you get into that field?
I, for many years, studied sexism and racism, and I actually still do study those things. One of the biggest downers about studying prejudice, first, is that it's very easy to document. It's not a hard effect to find. People are biased, and there's a lot of prejudice. The second is that, when you talk to an audience about that, there's not a really happy takeaway. So if I'm talking to a group of young women who are about to go, interview for jobs, and I'm just talking about the prevalence of sexism, I don't have a great happy takeaway for them. Things are getting better, but it's not going to change next week. Part of what sort of led me into this area was wanting to give something to groups that tend to have less power, to give them tools that would help them to kind of push through even when the odds are against them. So that's not a part that I talk about that often when I'm talking about this work, but one of the things that I wanted to be able to do is say to people, the world's not perfectly fair. You can't control everything that happens in a situation. You can't totally control how the other person sees you, but you do have some control over how you present yourself and whether you walk away from stressful situations like job interviews, knowing that you did everything that you could do, that you really showed them. And so that's kind of what led me into this area. And I realized that one of the things that people don't do well is trying to talk themselves out of feeling bad. So we're not very good at, when we're feeling bad, saying, actually, things are great and I'm great and I'm really strong and successful, because we feel like we're lying to ourselves. But our bodies are pretty good at tricking us into feeling good, even when we don't feel good. So if we're feeling unhappy, for example, just forcing a smile can make us feel better. And in my own research, I've found that if you're feeling powerless and anxious and not confident, holding your body in an expansive, open way can actually make you feel powerful and confident and less anxious. So that seemed like a really good, simple tool that people could use in these situations that are filled with social judgment and bias.
So why do you think we are that way? Why do you think we are difficult, so hard on ourselves?
Geez, that is a big question.
Yeah.
One reason is that we're all kind of walking around not talking about our insecurities. And so the result of that is that we feel like we're alone in our insecurities, that no one else is having them, or no one else is feeling like a phony or feeling like we're about to be found out. That's kind of an artifact of not talking about those things. But, I also think that the way that we respond to stressful situations and challenges is primitive and kind of maladaptive. It's so when we face a really stressful situation, again, like a job interview or a first date, rather than take an accurate assessment of what the stakes are, we go into this kind of fight or flight mode and we act like scared animals that are being chased by a predator. Most situations do not involve a tiger about to pounce on us. That response, that fight or flight response, is making us feel even worse and making it very hard for us to perform well in these stressful situations. It's not an adaptive response, but it's a very common response.
By the way, which came first? Did the book come because of the speech, or was that planned?
I mean, I would have written a book whether or not I'd given a TED Talk. So yeah, I'm sure the content of the book was shaped to some extent, and I talk about that, by the responses that I got from viewers of the TED Talk. But the book would have happened either way. So I think they're independent in their existence, but the content is dependent.
For me, I saw that, and one of the aspects of our job is we get asked to test people's security. Part of that may be actually testing it as if we were a bad guy breaking into their office or their building. A lot of nerves and fear, not because something bad's going to happen, but just getting caught. And I saw your TED Talk, fascinated about this power posing part of it, and then actually started doing that. I don't know if I don't have scientific evidence that made a huge difference, but it felt like it did for sure.
Yeah.
Before entering and doing something that's going to make me terribly scared and nervous. Then we had a contest we run out in Vegas every year, and we had a contestant who never did anything involving social engineering, and she won by a landslide. And she had made the statement when she was being interviewed how she won, that she saw your TED Talk and she spent 2 minutes in the bathroom before the contest doing power posing.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and that's what made her get in there and win. Yeah, it was kind of fascinating. It was someone else saying it without any provocation, just saying, "Oh yeah, this is what I did, and this made me get in there on the phone."
That's really cool. That's really cool.
So when you were giving that talk, you talked about some of your life, an accident that you had, and how you bounced back from that. I know you talk a lot about your accident, and it's in the book, so I know people can read about that, and I'm sure you're tired of telling the story over and over. So let me ask you a different kind of question. That was such a huge thing to come back from because there was actually like physical limitations and other limitations due to that accident. And then your research and your whole like fake it till you make it, your power posing, all of that helped you combat that. Do you think that those types of things can help ability to learn or progression or career or?
They can. I'm hesitant to say that they will for everyone. And of course, they won't for everyone. Part of it is believing that it's going to work, of course. But yeah, I think that any kind of limitation that has a psychological component, this approach using your posture and your movement and your body to communicate confidence to your brain, I think can be really effective. It's it's easier for us to do that than, as I was saying before, the self-talk, which just tends to backfire because when we're feeling bad, we're not going to believe anyone who tells us that actually things are great. So yeah, I think it can. And I think that some of the most interesting work comes from people studying post-traumatic stress and doing research on what kinds of interventions help people who are experiencing post-traumatic stress. Because post-traumatic stress is it's kind of, in a way, captures all of the elements of powerlessness. People are fearful, obviously they're anxious, they feel that they were not able to get themselves out of some awful situation. So they feel, in some senses, like their bodies failed them. It's very, very difficult to treat post-traumatic stress. It's very resistant. So a lot of the work with veterans who've seen combat and are experiencing post-traumatic stress, some of the best interventions are focused on the body. So it's hard to get people to want to talk about the traumatic event that they experienced and to engage in more traditional talk therapy. But getting people who are experiencing that kind of stress and anxiety to breathe more deeply, to hold themselves in a way that's more proud and powerful and confident, the feedback effects of doing that can be really powerful. And, a lot of research now showing that using those kinds of approaches can dramatically reduce post-traumatic stress symptoms and improve quality of life for people suffering from that kind of situation. I think that there are a lot of pieces that we don't yet understand as scientists about how this all works. I think we're just kind of looking at the tip of the iceberg right now. We know that changing the way you hold yourself or the facial expression that you're making can change the way you feel, and often does change the way you feel. How that's happening, it's a bit of a black box. We've got some evidence for some of the things that are going on. But, you said earlier something about how you adopted these powerful poses and it made you feel confident, but you don't know scientifically if it worked. And I would say, well, if you felt more confident, then it worked. How it worked with you is something that we're still kind of figuring out. What are the different mechanisms and when do you get, for example, changes to hormones, which is one of the things that we've looked at. Standing in an expansive posture that an alpha in a primate hierarchy might adopt can increase your testosterone and decrease your cortisol temporarily, which makes you more confident and assertive, but also less anxious and stress reactive. So that's one of the things that's happening. But it's also true that opening your shoulders, standing upright, just making more space in your body and with your body allows you to breathe more deeply and more slowly. And when we're breathing in that way, we're using our bodies in another way to signal information to the nervous system that we're not in a fight or flight situation, that we're actually in a rest and digest situation. So that's another one of the mechanisms. So I think it's simple. And at the same time, I think that, there's a lot under the surface that we still don't understand about exactly how it works.
Well, Amy, thank you for your work, by the way. Two things occurred to me while I was listening to you speak, and both of these are from my background and experience as well. The latter concept of just sort of breathing and how you trick your mind into feeling more relaxed is basically what we teach in stress management, right? So if there are things that you can't keep yourself from thinking or keep yourself from obsessing. What you can do is learn to control your body and to breathe deeply and to move slowly. And what that eventually does is feed into your general cognition and how you feel about it. And so, what I was going to ask you too is how your concept of power posing and how that creates sort of this presence. Would you say that relates to sort of Leon Festinger's ideas of cognitive dissonance, and how you need to be able to walk your walk and talk your talk. Otherwise, you feel a certain level of discomfort within yourself.
Geez, I hadn't really thought of it in that way. You could say that you're creating dissonance by adopting a powerful posture when you're not feeling powerful. But I think that the body is so much better at leading the mind out of the woods than the mind is at leading the mind out of the woods. That you probably have a lot more dissonance when you're using more cognitive approaches. But I think that the more cognitive approaches that we've been, honestly, I think, stuck in for quite a while now. And I'm not saying that, talk therapy isn't helpful, but I do think that we kind of neglect the body. And I think it's partly because it feels primitive. I mean, the idea that it is that simple, that our bodies, as you said earlier, this is a kind of simple approach. And I said, well, actually, it's complicated. So I sound like I'm contradicting myself, but I'm not. It is simple and primitive. And I think that that's part of why some people don't like it. They feel like, well, it can't be that simple. We must need to talk our way out of these moments of stress and anxiety and panic. And the truth is that we're just not very good at doing that. This connection between the body and the mind is the fact that it's super primitive. We shouldn't be leveraging that.
Absolutely.
Instead of being ashamed that we're animals, we should go, oh, great. This is the way it works for the other animals. So why not do the same thing? Yeah, it creates a lot of synchrony, actually.
I absolutely agree. And it really speaks to, I used to conduct therapy. And one of the things that we talked about was acting as if. So if you are not confident, act as if you are. And what does that person look like and how do they behave? So I think it's all very consistent and wonderful work. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks. And thanks for the work you're doing too.
It's interesting because we had a guest on the show, Dan Airley, very similar to your research, just on himself. He had to take medication. Okay, so he tricked himself. Even as it was curing him, it still was, and it never became pleasurable. But he tricked himself into looking forward to it by a reward system. And I remember him saying to me, it wasn't the first time, it wasn't the second time, it took a while to build that in, but it was very simplistic. And I remember thinking the same thing, it's just so simple. Like we're always looking for this complex answer, and here it is like the most simple, and it worked.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of funny that we're so stuck in our heads that we kind of miss the forest for the trees. But I think part of it too is that we're also looking for, I wouldn't say quick fixes, but like complete fixes. We're looking for things that make us the best, or feel happy every day. So I think our expectation about what the goal should be is really off. That also makes us less interested in these little things that we can do that will make us feel a little bit better each day or every time we face whatever our personal challenges are. Even though over time, those things are small changes, but over time they become big changes because we learn about ourselves. It becomes just so much easier for us to self-regulate, to present the self that we want to present, and so on and so forth. So I think that part of it is that it's not just that it's simple, it's that it feels like not enough. Yeah, we want these complete solutions, and that's why we do things like New Year's resolutions, which completely backfire because they're huge. People don't make small New Year's resolutions. They make huge New Year's resolutions to change, to become something different. And that gives them a lot of opportunity to fail along the way. So instead of focusing on the process, they focus on this huge outcome that inevitably ends up not coming true because they give up before they get there.
In your book, one of the things that really struck me that was fascinating, I'm a student of Dr. Ekman's, and he taught me that something similar to what you said with body language, but that with your face, if you make the real facial expression, you can create in yourself the emotion that is attached to it.
That's right.
If you make happiness, if you make fear, if you make anger, you will find yourself feeling those emotions. And in your book, you talked about something very similar to that concept, but with the body, not so much the face. It seems easier in the sense that, we know that happy is a positive emotion. We know that angry could be a negative emotion. So if we want to feel positive, we show, happiness. How do we learn which body language will shape our minds into positive outputs?
I think it's exactly the same principle. And, I talk about that work quite a bit in the book. They call that facial feedback, where if you mimic the facial expression that goes with a given emotion, you then feel that emotion. What you need is to know which expressions go with which emotions. And we aren't as far along in understanding which postures go with which emotions. So we know that there's 6 or 7 universal facial expressions of emotion. I could go through with anger and fear and sadness, happiness, disgust, surprise, contempt. I might be missing one. But with posture, we're just beginning to understand that. And I think the best work is coming from this woman named Jessica Tracy, who's a professor at University of British Columbia. She's the one who's really been studying this expansive posture and how it relates to power in all cultures that she's looked at. So everywhere she's gone in the world, if you show people a picture of another person with their arms thrown up in the air in a V and say, what emotion is this person feeling? They'll say something like pride or confidence or power. And if you watch them win a race, the first thing they'll do is throw their arms up in the air. So we know that that's a universal expression of feeling, powerful or proud or confident. There aren't that many that we've identified yet that are not facial expressions, but are more postural expressions. So I think as we begin to understand that, we'll be able to do that. I also think that people are we've kind of touched on this already, but I think that people are resistant to this. I think that the science community is a little bit resistant to the idea that these things that are kind of unconscious, and I'm using that term very loosely, not or imprecisely, and cognitive psychologists would probably object to how I'm using it, but the scientific community has trouble with this, and there's, I think, a lot of pushback against these ideas. So it doesn't exactly feel like a safe thing to study as a scientist, because we'll inevitably be challenged more than if you're studying something that seems more obvious, that, one of these more cognitive approaches. I think there are a few things that are in the way of us learning how to move our bodies in a way that will make us feel better. One is just not knowing what the universal emotions are that are postural as opposed to facial. And the other is, I think there's some pushback in the scientific community when it comes to studying these things. So that means the process of learning about them as scientists is going to be slower. It's going to take us a while to get there.
That is interesting and a little sad. I was reading a study months ago about that, the thing you brought up about the hand gestures, like the up in the air, feeling pride or victory or confidence.
Yep.
And there was a researcher who actually looked into blind athletes, especially athletes.
That's Jessica. Yep, that's Jessica Tracy's work.
Oh, that was her work. Okay. Yeah, so I was fascinated by that because here was a group of athletes who were born and raised blind, and yet when they won, they did that very same gesture with their hands up in the air. So obviously it wasn't something that was learned doing other people's actions at winning. I found that super fascinating, that this was maybe a step towards a direction of finding universal body language.
Look, that's one lab, and what we've talked about so far, this postural stuff, most of that is coming out of one lab. So she's doing a huge amount of the work, and you don't have a whole lot of other labs who are studying these things, which I think is too bad, because I think it's fascinating. But it's hard to be it's hard to be doing the work that is more likely to face skepticism. It's tough to have a career as an academic and always be the one who's having to push back and go, no, this is a real thing. I know that it feels counterintuitive, but it's real.
Yeah. Let me actually take a step back, because I have your book here, and it's titled, how would you define that? How would you define presence?
I think first of all, it's temporary, which means by definition that it has to be. It's about the present. But I think that second half of the 20th century, where this idea of presence became more popular, people saw it as something grand, something that you kind of strive for your whole life, and then you might reach some monk-like state of presence. And I don't think that anyone, including monks, ever reached that permanent kind of state of presence. It's something that's fleeting. And I think to acknowledge that makes it easier for us to get there. Because again, it's sort of like the New Year's resolution to go for to go for broke. Like, I'm going to have all of it, ends up sort of discouraging us. It's daunting. So to say, look, I'm not going to ever get to a point where I'm present all the time, that I'm going to figure out how to be present in these really stressful moments. So that's the first part. But what it actually is, as I define it, is the ability to really know who you are, so to know your skills and abilities and personality and talents and values, and to be able to access those parts of yourself and bring them forward in really stressful moments. Because what we tend to do in those moments is focus much more on what the other person is thinking of us, and that takes us completely out of the present. So when we feel that kind of confidence and power to bring our best selves forward, we are able to be present. And when we're present, it really shows in our behavior. We can be confident without being arrogant. We clearly believe our own story, the story that we're telling. And there's no reason why we shouldn't believe our story, but sometimes when we get to the door of a stressful moment, we stop believing ourselves and self-doubt just kind of floods us. And the other thing that happens is that we move in a way that's kind of synchronous. Our verbal and nonverbal behavior aligns. That's authenticity. That's how it comes across. When we're lying, all of those things become discombobulated. And that's really the best way to tell if somebody is lying, is to look for these asynchronies. So maybe you're telling a happy story, but your body is doing things that look sad. That tells you that something's off with what that person is talking about.
So active listening is the staying present.
Yes, I guess it is a key to staying present. I focus more on active listening as an outcome of being present, that when you're present, it's easier to be an active listener, or, really just to hear what the other person is saying. If you're present, then you're not worrying about what you should have said 2 minutes ago, or worrying about what will happen after this, interaction ends. You're able to actually be there with your guard down and hear what the other person is saying. And when you're doing that, that becomes, it's sort of self-reinforcing. So I would say that it certainly helps you to maintain presence.
So Amy, just out of curiosity, clearly there's a lot of work that needs to be done still. As you said, there's so much that we don't know. So where do you sort of see in your dream world, in your ideal situation, where do you kind of see the research heading? Or where would you like to see it go?
First, I would just like people to be open to this sort of, the funny thing is, it's not a new idea. It's an idea that William James put forth in the 1800s. And, he's one of the great psychologists. So it's not a new idea, but I would like psychology to be open to it, and to understand that we're kind of at the beginning of the exploration, and we'll know more as we go, but to not shut it down. So that's the first thing. And I know that seems like that's not much to ask, but that's kind of where I feel we are right now. In my dream world, I actually think that clinical psychology and medicine are much more open to looking at these things, because they're working directly with people who are struggling, and they're much more open to finding solutions, to developing interventions. So if something is promising, they're more likely to want to do the applied research to figure out how to make it work. And so I kind of see that as the most fertile place to study these things, is, not necessarily inside the lab with Psych 101 students as your subjects, but in more field-based settings where you're dealing with populations that are struggling in some way. So I would love to see interventions developed for kids who are bullied. That's one of the groups that I hear from a lot, parents of kids who are bullied, domestic abuse survivors, women, especially in places where the women as a group have very little power, people dealing with chronic illness. There's so many populations that I think could benefit from something so simple, a non-pharmaceutical intervention we should be excited about.
Absolutely.
So that's where I would like to see the research go. And I don't feel that I even have to be the one doing it. I'd like to see other people doing that kind of work. We found in our work that when people adopt these really expansive postures for a couple of minutes before going through a stressful mock job interview, they perform better in the job interview. So people are more likely to want to hire them. And the change that we're seeing, the difference between the people who've adopted the high power poses versus the low power poses, is that the high power posers are presenting themselves in a more compelling way. They're more enthusiastic and confident. They are more authentic and believable, and that's why people want to hire them. So what's happening when they adopt these poses before they walk in, you don't do it in front of people, but before they walk in, is that they're kind of optimizing their brains to deal well in a really stressful situation and to be themselves in that situation.
Here, I want to thank you for coming. I know I got to run. I just want to say that we did learn something about you recently, that you were in a magazine. Which magazine was that again? Rolling Stones?
Rolling Stone. Yeah, well, you might be able to pick me out of the sea of 87,000 people.
So in the sea of 7,000 people, you're there in the picture, and who else is in that picture as well?
I think Bruce Hornsby would be in that picture.
This is not happening.
It doesn't, Dave. It doesn't mean she likes Bruce Hornsby. It just means she was unfortunately in the same picture.
We had this discussion.
Why would you? Who doesn't like Bruce Hornsby? I mean, really?
Yeah, exactly. Chris, who doesn't like Bruce Hornsby?
Oh, Amy.
I think he's the strangest person to not like. He's just like a super nice guy who's a really talented musician. So even if you don't love his songs, I think you're not taking on the right position.
Oh no, as a person, I'm sure he's awesome.
So I've already expelled two of my Bruce Hornsby things that I can play during a podcast. Would you like to hear really quick the way it is? It's up to you. You're the guest.
I wish I could, but I can't right now. I'm sorry.
See? All right.
That's a diplomatic way of saying no. Yes.
I tell you, sorry about that. So Amy, I know you got to run. There's two things we always ask if you have time, because you talk about just a book that you personally.
Oh, I would read so many books I love, but I think for this audience, I would definitely recommend Joe Navarro's book, What Everybody is Saying, which is a great book about reading body language. You know, from Joe Navarro, who's also a big fan of Paul Ekman, but a former FBI agent. So he really gets it. He's good at reading people's body language. I'd recommend that one.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yep.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Out of everything, she was on the Rolling Stones magazine. She was on the Rolling Stones in a picture with her and Bruce Hornsby. It's amazing.
She was there. It's like a participation ribbon. It doesn't mean she likes.
I don't know why you're all trying to downplay this. You're trying to downplay this more than the FBI and Apple. Come on.
Now that's a low blow. I mean, come on. Oh man. So listen, Amy, I've been begging her to come on.
Chris, there was a discussion that we had prior to coming onto the podcast that probably is not going to be shared with the rest of it. But I said, if Mandolin Rain and The Way It Is came on the radio, would you turn it off? And she said, absolutely not. Why would I turn that off?
Wait, hang on. Michelle, do you recall that at all? I don't recall that.
You better not destroy this evidence. You better not destroy this.
I actually do recall it, but I think she said it's because I think she said it's because she's a nice person. Clearly, she didn't want to hurt Dave's feelings, and she certainly didn't want to hurt Bruce Hornsby's feelings.
Yeah.
So thank you for Michelle for having the ethical integrity to actually come through and talk about the real facts that are at hand. Chris, not so much.
You know, listen, I don't want to hurt Bruce Hornsby's feelings. I bet he is an awesome guy. We were hanging out, having a drink together. I bet he'd be a ton of fun. I think if we had more time with Amy, if we said, who would you rather hang out with, Neil Fallon or Bruce Hornsby?
Well, that's a question we'll save for next time.
Next time. I agree. So, yeah. Well, guys, guess what? Other big news is Dave is back on IRC.
I'm still not op and social engineer, by the way.
You will be by the time this podcast comes out in 2 weeks.
You can also join my Opt SE Toolkit account or in the IRC chat room SE Toolkit. I'm also in there, and I'm also operator, but I'm not in the social engineer one.
Well, okay. First of all, I think we'll take care of the operator thing, but now you know exactly where to go to get your questions answered.
That's right, and the new version just came out, so big news there. So go get the new version, all nice and shiny.
We should have brought that up before. That's awesome.
Well, you were kind of commandeering the entire conversation there, so it's fine.
Oh, I'm sorry that I had to play catch up because you wouldn't let Hornsby go.
Listen, it wasn't 10 minutes. I only did 2 this time. I've been trying to get better at what I'm doing and at least allow some stuff going on without Hornsby interruptions. I'm being courteous to you, Chris.
You are. You are.
He is kind of weaning himself off. I think we have to give him credit for that.
I do. I have to give him credit because he only played 2, and he asked permission of the guest to play the 3rd, and she rejected him, and he didn't do it. We do have to give him credit.
Well, I mean, I could decide next time it's going to be 5, but it's cool.
You could decide that. That would be horrible. So you got that. You have our website, social-engineer.org. By the way, Dave, what's your handle?
Hacking Dave on Twitter, REL1K on IRC. And you can always find me in the SE Toolkit as operator and social-engineer as not an operator.
Oh, man, I tell you.
I like Dave.
Oh, don't even.
Later, number 76.
79.
79.
Swan boats and daisy chains. Can't seem to recall any given name. I see the footprints, how they come, how they go. Was that only a moment or many years ago? My heart is gone.